Yeah, I'll react to that, sure.
Hey guys, preemptive like how to save the Spanish Empire. This is the second Spanish Empire video in a row for me, and I'm not complaining. Very interesting. The first one was about, well, I don't know which one I'm going to upload first, but was about the Spanish Empire having a plan to take over China in the 1500s, and that was fascinating. So, armchair historian, hope everyone's doing well, ready to learn. Let's go. Let's know.
At its height, Spain was the world's first global superpower, spanning Europe, the Americas, Africa, and Asia. Its empire was so vast that half the known world had been granted to the Spanish crown by papal decree. Spanish monarchs were the temporal and spiritual defenders of Christendom.
They say half of the known world, but they split up, and I gotta say, it seems like Spain got the good side of the deal. Although the giant chunk, large country Brazil was, so I'm not sure what the borders were exactly back then of Brazil when it was first kind of a colony. But if it's the known world, then why do we just talk about them being split territory in the New World?
Against Protestant rivals and the threat of Ottoman expansion. Its galleons carried silver, spices, and soldiers across 3 oceans, from Flanders to the Philippines. Yet within centuries, Spain's global empire had all but vanished, reduced to scattered outposts and memories of past glory. Like all great empires, their rise and fall was the result of many different factors. But what if Spain could get a second chance? Using the power of hindsight, we'll see whether history can offer a way to save the empire.
Diagnosis.
Before we begin, a quick thanks to our sponsor and partner for today's video, Europa.
Hey, I pre-ordered this. Guys, if you're interested in Europa Universalis 5, you want to get it because you're watching this with me now, just make sure to use the promo codes and links from Armchair Historian. Again, original link, top of the description.
Universalis 5. I'm a huge fan of grand strategy games, and the Europa Universalis series specifically, which I've been playing since high school. When Paradox Interactive sent me a copy to try out, I was blown away. EU5 builds on everything that fans love about the series.
I'm sure I'm a bit older.
Deep diplomacy, refined economics, and an even more realistic military and logistics system. Purchase your copy of Europa Universalis 5 on Steam today using our link in the pinned comment, and get ready to spend hundreds, if not thousands of hours in this deep strategy game.
So I've played Hearts of Iron 4, but I really don't know how to play it. I know a lot of the cheats. Like, I looked up the cheats and I use them so often that I kind of just know most of them off the top of my head by heart. And I kind of just like seeing, like, entering the game and just tweaking certain things around the globe and countries and making some stronger than they are in real life and some weaker, just to see how it plays out. And I've played a good amount of Hearts of Iron 4, but I've never really played it as it should be played, as strange as that is. And I'm sure I'm going to do something similar in Europa Universalis.
Hundreds, if not thousands of hours in this deep strategy game. The first and most important thing to know is that Spain's empire didn't collapse overnight. Its decline was the result of overlapping problems that slowly undermined its ability to hold a global realm together. 5 of these stand out above the rest. First was its economy. Spain was outrageously wealthy thanks to American silver, but this wealth caused problems. The flood of bullion pushed prices up across Europe, while much of the pesos gained was spent on wars or luxury imports instead of building local industry. The crown relied on a Castilian tax base and borrowed heavily from bankers, leading to repeated payment suspensions. Meanwhile, a number of plagues and the expulsion of Moriscos also drained their vital labor pool needed for agriculture and industry. In effect, Spain was swimming in cash, but splashing it in all the wrong places. Next was the military. Normally, empires find themselves suffering from a shortage of money, manpower, or discipline. This wasn't the issue for the Spaniards, whose vast reserves of silver and troops were supplemented by professional forces that dominated much of the pike and shot era. The problem was geography, coupled with the complexity of crown bureaucracy. Running an empire that spanned the globe meant fighting on too many fronts at once. Spain's armies and fleets were drawn into decades-long wars across Western Europe and the Mediterranean, while also protecting convoys across the Atlantic and Pacific. While
Instant communication, I bring this up so much, but having such a large reach from your main kind of base of power, especially when you don't have instant communication, and communication can take days, weeks, or even months, especially to go back and forth to receive it. And then when you receive the updated information, the situation might be way different. And so controlling them and putting down like localized rebellions and stuff, I can't imagine how exponentially more difficult it would be to keep that much territory then, even compared to now. Does that make sense?
While they could easily replenish material losses, Spain still suffered its fair share of defeats, with the failed armadas of 1588 to 1601, a major defeat at Rocroi in 1643, and a slew of major uprisings throughout the 1640s, all revealing glaring weaknesses in the empire. With commitments scattered across such a vast realm, it was hard for Spain to fund and pursue them all effectively. This also extended into the administration. The Spanish Empire was governed through a patchwork of regional laws and councils. This system often produced slow, contradictory decisions. Many offices were sold for quick revenue, putting unqualified men in positions of power, while nobles and the church were largely exempt from taxation. Attempts to centralize
nobles too? So if you were super rich and wealthy, you didn't have to pay taxes.
Authority were often met with fierce resistance, and the result was centralized authority were often met with fierce resistance, and the result was an administration that struggled to act decisively in a crisis. Still, reforms had to come at some point. By the 18th century, the Bourbon dynasty attempted to consolidate the old patchwork of councils and courts under a more unified ministry. Major Bourbon reforms were also put forward to rein in Spain's crown jewel, the Americas. Free trade was opened up all across the New World at the cost of tighter administration. Peninsular-born Spaniards dominated top positions as duties were lowered and trade traffic boomed. But these new practices also alienated many locally born Creole elites, whose career options were being supplanted by the Peninsulares. By the time Napoleon invaded Spain in 1808, the monarchy's authority collapsed. American territories were left largely to their own devices until the Bonapartes were expelled. Even after the Bourbons had returned to reassert control, the damage had already been done. However, even earlier than that, Spain spent much of the 1700s struggling to keep up with rival powers, whose navies could intercept Spain's treasure fleets, seize key ports, and flood Spanish America with contraband. Spain's slower pace of modernization left its sea lanes vulnerable. By the late 18th century,
I think a lot of, no power stays at the head of its game forever, and I think maybe that a lot of the powers that become super powerful were probably ahead of the game in certain things that were really important in taking power, like overseas trade, and the Portuguese and Spanish were the kings of it early on. But I think it's only a matter of time before other powers catch up, like France and the English. And so, and like that saying, or sometimes it's nice to get new fresh eyes on a problem, even if they're not as experienced as you, because you can become complacent and you might lose some of that drive. I think that is true for both people and for nations. I don't know. It's just a kind of a theory I have, but I think the big powers, they were really good at something in the beginning, and it was only a matter of time before other powers caught up with that.
Spain's trade monopoly and much of its imperial revenue was fatally undermined and could no longer compete on the seas. Like a great encierro, Spanish monarchs found themselves struggling to keep ahead of the stampede. Shaky finances, endless wars, a clunky administration, spurned elites, and powerful rivals. Unlike the Spaniards of the time, we have the unfair advantage of hindsight. Stepping into their shoes, let's see how Spain might have kept ahead of the stampede, and maybe, just maybe, made it all the way to the finish line in one piece. Any plan to save the Spanish Empire?
That's the thing, there is no finish line. So, a good example, by the way, modern day example, would be China and the USA right now. And I'm not saying that China is guaranteed to surpass the USA, right? But the USA has been kind of on the top of its game for a while. But China is now coming up, and I feel like there's probably just more drive in the Chinese mindset that America might be losing a bit of its oomph, you know? I don't know if that's the best. Yeah.
In one piece. Any plan to save the Spanish Empire has to start with money. Wealth from the Americas was vast, but it came in unpredictable bursts, and much of it vanished into war debts, luxury imports, and foreign goods. Between 1526 and 1555, silver imports to Seville jumped by nearly 500%, yet by the 1630s, interest payments on royal bonds were swallowing up nearly half of the crown's revenue. When the fleets ran late or were lost, the treasury was suddenly empty. So, the first fix here would be broadening the tax base. In the 16th and 17th centuries, most of the burden fell on the crown's heartland of Castile, while nobles and the church were largely exempt. Bringing those privileged groups into the tax system, even modestly, would make revenue steadier. This wouldn't be easy, but other states like France eventually managed it through negotiated contributions and phased reforms. Next is tackling debt dependency more sustainably. Instead of selling offices or issuing more bonds to cover shortfalls.
Jesus, this seems like overkill of an analogy here.
Instead of selling.
Sorry, okay.
Next is tackling debt dependency more sustainably. Instead of selling offices or issuing more bonds to cover shortfalls, Spain could stabilize spending by prioritizing defense of trade routes and overseas hubs over prestige wars in Europe. This kind of selective entrenchment could cut costs and reduce the need for emergency borrowing. It would also have the added benefit of curbing foreign influence from historical groups like Dutch and Genoese financiers. Finally, invest in industries at home. Directing a portion of bullion into shipbuilding, arms production, and textiles within Spain would reduce reliance on imports and create a more self-sustaining economy. Even better, if the state didn't expel ethnic groups like the Moriscos, there would be a larger pool of workers willing to contribute to this burgeoning industry. It wouldn't make Spain immune to future crises, but it would give the empire a stronger economic core, the foundation it needed to hold everything else together. For the military, Spanish commitments were spread across too many fronts for too long. From the wars in Flanders to defending Italy, the Mediterranean, and transoceanic trade routes, every theater demanded money, men, and ships. Losing any one of them could be devastating. The most effective way to ease this strain is to prioritize. That means clearly identifying which territories and trade routes are essential to the empire's survival, and which can be held with minimal forces or even ceded through diplomacy. For example, scaling back involvement in costly, low-return campaigns in Central Europe could free up resources to protect the Americas and the sea lanes that kept silver flowing. Another key step would be to improve how local forces were organized, and doing it earlier. The Empire did not lack local militias or auxiliary troops. The real challenge was that these men often had to fund their own arms and equipment, while the profession of soldiering demanded full-time dedication that few could afford. Eventually, the Bourbon reforms professionalized local militias in the Americas to great success. Our approach would mean these changes were implemented far earlier, before the empire was further destabilized. Finally, invest in mobility. The lifeblood of Spain's empire was the ocean. During Philip II's reign, vast amounts of crown resources were poured into keeping the treasure route secured. However, later Habsburg monarchs struggled to sustain these fleets in both the Mediterranean and Atlantic. Expanding the capacity of fast squadrons and troop transports would make it easier to respond to threats where they mattered most, rather than trying to be everywhere at once. By focusing on the empire's core lifelines, instead of trying to be omnipresent, Spain could have maintained a strong military presence without overextending itself.
I think there's sort of a paradox for like when you're building, you're in the early stages of building your worldwide empire. The main control, governmental, economic control, the wealthy people, the powerful people, are focused in one area, and you don't have to really negotiate with other places, where as you get those areas and you control them, but you're prosperous. This is kind of why it's antithetical. Like, becoming more prosperous lessens your power in a central sense, right? Because now you are not the obvious all-powerful center of the empire, because other places like in Naples and the Netherlands and other places are getting more strong, because, and then, so you're the whole empire is stronger, but there's no longer such an obvious central authority as there was before, because now you have a little bit of sway because of just the area in the Spanish Empire you're in being more wealthy and strong, you know? And so I know the armchair historian, you know, that this video isn't, it's just like, what could they do? But even if you had all of these answers, it's about implementing them that is going to be almost impossible, because you're no longer strictly here. Does that make sense? Am I talking nonsense here, or?
For administration, Spain's patchwork of kingdoms came with their own laws, privileges, and councils, which made decision-making slow and inconsistent. In an empire spread across 4 continents, delayed communication could mean the difference between solving a crisis and letting it spiral out of control.
Yeah, so it's not really just the size of your empire that I think makes it harder, but in the beginning, when you take a lot of land, but they are nothing without you in Madrid, in Spain, in the Iberian Peninsula, that's one thing. But as you keep that area and the wealth spreads more and they get stronger, now you have a lot more hoops to jump through, is what I'm trying to say there.
Solving a crisis and letting it spiral out of control. The first step in addressing this is professionalizing governance. Selling offices for quick revenue often put unqualified or absentee officials in charge. Ending the sale of key posts and appointing administrators based on merit, ideally with experience in the region they govern, would make the bureaucracy more effective. If they could stomach the thought of it, Spain could follow the Dutch or English example of merit-based fiscal boards instead of endlessly expanding demanding clerical staff. Spain's own parliament had even pushed for more oversight on crown finances at times, meaning that a tradition of accountability existed. It just required the monarchy to nurture this attitude to be more consistent. Second, reduce duplication of authority. Multiple councils and overlapping jurisdictions caused delays and confusion. Consolidating them into fewer, more specialized bodies would speed up communication and decision-making. And finally, improve information flow. Relying solely on slow correspondence left Madrid months behind events overseas. While faster communications like the telegraph were centuries away, Spain could still establish a standardized courier relay system and empower trusted viceroys with more autonomy to act decisively.
I swear the telegraph, I talk about instant communication or almost instant communication. It changes everything. It changes everything. And before that, you had to rely on just going to somewhere with a message and then going back with a reply. Now that reply might be outdated because something might have changed. Instant communication, more than anything, more than guns, is so cool to me, and just it changes everything. I'm repeating myself. And with it's also, if you have a ship with one very well respected and knowledgeable captain, and a rest of less knowledgeable but good shipmates, that could work better than having more knowledgeable, respected people on the ship, because now there's confusion over command,
without waiting for instructions. Viceroys with more autonomy to act decisively without waiting for instructions. Later ministers, such as the Count Duke of Olivares, attempted grand schemes of centralization and reform, but his overreach alienated key regions like Catalonia and Portugal. More modest, carefully negotiated reforms might have strengthened royal authority without provoking rebellion. These changes wouldn't erase the tensions between the empire's diverse regions, but they would give Madrid a better chance to coordinate, respond, and keep the machinery of empire running smoothly. Addressing Spain's lifeline in the Americas would be one of the most crucial steps. Later Bourbon reforms boosted trade and revenue in the New World, but it also alienated many Creole elites, who saw their influence reduced as peninsular-born officials filled top posts. That resentment would become a major fault line when the monarchy faltered in 1808. A more sustainable approach would have been to share power, not hoard it. Giving Creole elites greater access to higher admin positions or military training in Spain would have tied their interests more closely to Madrid's. Loyalty is easier to maintain when local leaders feel they have a real stake in the system. Tax and trade.
Here's what I would do, okay? If I'm the king or back in Spain in this situation, I would try and make sure the rulers in areas around my empire, like in the New World, in the Americas, would be loyal, right, for one thing, but loyalty can change as their own interests become tempting. And so what I would do, I would have a constant someone whose like only job, and give him a ship or ships for this one purpose, to just kind of continuously go back and forth across the Atlantic to check on these areas and to report back, like, how is the person over there ruling? Is there any sign of rebellion, or are they still loyal? And then I would have a secret guy who the first guy to go check on doesn't know about, because the first guy could also be tempted by, he could lie and to get his own stuff back in there. I would have a second guy whose only job it is to go back and forth checking on that guy. And then I would pay him a lot to report back to me, just to ensure that these places are still loyal to my throne, I'm not saying that if I was in that position, that's probably what I would do, but I know you only have so many ships.
Policies also
I don't know.
feel they have a real stake in the system. Tax and trade policies also needed more flexibility. While loosening restrictions on trade was a step in the right direction,
I wouldn't want to be a king. I'm just saying if I was and I had this problem, that's what I would do, maybe.
the benefits weren't evenly spread. More importantly, it left American merchants resentful of uneven opportunities, which, combined with indigenous labor abuses inherited from earlier tribute and mita systems, set the stage for rebellions like that of Tupac Amaru II in Peru. Instead, ensuring that inland and peripheral regions also profited from reforms would have reduced the sense that Madrid favored a few key ports at everyone else's expense. Finally, investment in local defense could serve both practical and political gains. Besides the military benefits we already discussed, having well-armed, well-trained militias, led by trusted local officers, would both protect against foreign threats and strengthen the bond between territory and crown. So besides improving military responsiveness, this push to make the Americas partners instead of subordinates would quash local attitudes toward independence.
Smart.
Last of all would be to deal with Spain's main rivals. By the mid-18th century, rival powers like...
And I feel like I'm sounding like a maniac, but this is what I would also rotate those groups of soldiers between the colonies so that they're never in the same place at once and grow an attachment to that place. It sounds sadistic, but I'm just trying to get in the shoes of trying to control this,
Britain
I guess.
and France. By the mid-18th century, rival powers like Britain and France had outpaced Spain in shipbuilding, finance, and industrial output. Their modern navies could intercept treasure fleets, seize key ports, and pour contraband into Spanish America. Spain's trade monopoly was fatally weakened. Closing that gap would require a sustained program of naval modernization. That means this
is the thing too, is with a more a power like Spain that was the only power in Europe that had this amount of overseas territory. As you go further, and then now other countries like France and England are learning your game and even better than your game and improving it. They're in a mindset where they're the new guys and they're building, and so everyone is, I would imagine, would have a bit more patriotism. Whereas in Spain, it's not like you can be like, okay, everyone, we have to change our attitude as if we were a newcomer. But now you have all these solidified, wealthy regions with different wants, and now it's harder to do that. And so, I had another thing I wanted to say. Now I forget. Shoot. All right.
A sustained program of naval modernization.
I remember. Sorry. What about this as an idea? What about a fake revolution as the people at the top? Not like an insane changing of power, but even something like a name change of the empire. Like erase Spanish Empire and Spanish Kingdom and just put a new name on it to maybe give people a feeling, without losing any of your power, give people a feeling that this is a new thing. We're not the Spanish Empire that's been around for centuries. This is the Iberian Union, a brand new entity that just so happens to have the same exact borders and people in charge. But maybe that would give people kind of a, like, we're now a newcomer again, or something like that, you know? Is that crazy?
That means dedicating a fixed share of bullion revenue.
Sorry, go just 10
weakened.
Seconds.
Closing that gap would require a sustained program of naval modernization. That means dedicating a fixed share of bullion revenue to shipyard expansion, adopting the latest warship designs, and improving gunnery and sailing training. Regular fleet exercises, even in peacetime, would keep the crews prepared for combat. Equally important was securing supply lines. Establishing more fortified waypoints and supply stations along major trade routes would reduce the risk of losing entire convoys to storms or enemy action. Finally, Spain needed to rethink its naval strategy. Rather than concentrating on defending the Iberian coastline, more aggressive convoy escorts and forward-deployed squadrons in the Caribbean and Pacific could have deterred rival powers from striking in the first place. A stronger, more modern navy wouldn't guarantee Spain's dominance, but it would make challenging its control far more costly for any would-be rival. Each of these fixes come with their own set of pitfalls. Broadening the tax base or sharing power with Creole elites seems like a no-brainer. But in reality, both would be fiercely challenged by nobles, clergy, and centralizing ministers. Cutting debt and avoiding prestige wars made fiscal sense, but dynastic alliances and the Habsburg burden as the defender of the faith would continue to drag Spain back into costly continental conflicts, regardless of policy. Even the more practical measures like investing in industry, strengthening militias, and modernizing the navy all faced the limits of volatile silver revenue, entrenched monopolies, and other powers racing ahead in shipbuilding and trade, not to mention the very real threat of sabotage. Most efforts to reform and consolidate were also affected by attitude. Asking monarchs to cede power or compromise with their own parliaments for the sake of stability was already a tall order. But pushing the state itself to adopt practices from rivals like the French, Dutch, or God forbid the English would be too much. Still, these ideals weren't beyond Spain's reach. The problem was scale, consistency, and timing. Implementing all of them together would have demanded rare political will, steady leadership, and decades of follow-through across multiple reigns. History shows that that's a tall order for any empire. But if Spain managed it, the Great Encierro might not have ended in a trampling, but with the empire making it all the way to the finish line in one piece.
What is the finish line now? There's never a finish line. It's always...
Thank you again to our sponsor and partner for today's video, Europa Universalis 5. Purchase your copy of Europa Universalis 5 on Steam today using our link in the pinned comment.
So, great video. I love that a lot. I think, first of all, reaching the finish line, I mean, history is never over, okay? Current events are just tomorrow's history. And the big thing that I think this is almost a hopeless thing, and I think the ways of saving Spain, if you could act like it was like you decide everything, would probably work, right? But I think it's just natural for new kind of pride leaders, for other people to just get better. I think this is what happened in the Roman Empire, to every empire, right? Maybe there were some empires that just screwed themselves over without having a lot of outside powers just getting stronger. But over time, a lot of people are really good in the beginning, and it sets them apart from everyone else. But over time, others catch up. And now they're catching up and even getting better than you at, say, shipbuilding and warfare and whatnot. But they still have that vigor, that drive, libido, if you want, to do stuff and do stuff as an entity. But as you get older and older as an empire, and the power is no longer just in Spain or in any example of an empire that's centralized, then you can't just switch these knobs and buttons and whatnot to get out of that. It's almost like it's doomed to fail, because an empire or any entity, a nation, is a bunch of individuals with individual interests and things about their lifestyle that they want to keep, and they want to forward their own interests. I think those become more and more separate from the centralized authorities' interests over time. and now you're facing other powers that are getting even better than you with their technology, but are also more cohesive. And I think this is just a natural thing about how societies fluctuate between being strong and weak, or you know. Very interesting video. Would love, guys, any comments on what I said. Maybe I said something incorrect. There's a good chance. You can call me out. Would love to see it. Answering any questions I might have had. You guys are always awesome. I hope to see you guys next time. Hope everyone's doing well. Bye, guys.